Does there exist a limitless and virtually untapped source of power that can end this planet's fatal addiction to fossil fuels and primitive nuclear fission? A source of power that can relatively easily be tapped from what is called the vacuum of space, a source of power that could make travel to the stars feasible and forever end poverty here on Earth? Or is free energy, as it's called, just so much science fiction? That's what Space Energy Access Systems hopes to prove one way or the other. Today we have with us Dr. Ted Loder, who is a professor at the University of New Hampshire, Department of Earth Sciences, and a member of the Institute of Study for the Study of Earth Sciences and Space. Dr. Loder is also SEA's Chief Science Technology Director. Welcome to EV World.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you, too. SEAS, or SEAS, stands for Space Energy Access Systems, Dr. Loder. What does that mean, Space Energy Access?
Well, it made a good acronym among other things, but what really it means it's in the name is inherent the information that available from the vacuum of space, not exactly when we look up in the sky space, but within the vacuum state, is a tremendous amount of energy which can be extracted if one knows how to do this. And so we named it Space Energy Access Systems because our goal of the corporation, SEAS, is to obtain devices that can extract this energy from this vacuum state.
Now, is SEAS
a quantum state? Sometimes called the quantum vacuum state. Sometimes it's called the free energy devices. It's kind of analogous, if you will, to setting up a windmill in a hill, and the wind blows by. You aren't paying for the wind, but the windmill is extracting energy as the wind moves by. In a similar manner, Space Energy Access Systems, the corporation, is looking for devices that do this, pulling energy from, some call it ether winds, or some call it ether. There's a number of different terms for it. That's getting into a bunch of physics,
right?
But that's the general sense of things.
Okay, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get further down in here. Is SEAS a for-profit corporation or a non-profit?
Yes, it is, sir.
It is, okay.
Yes.
So when were you organized, and so what is your mission here?
Well, we were organized several years ago. I don't know the exact date. I wasn't involved at the very beginning of it, but Dr. Greer, who's the CEO of the corporation, Dr. Stephen Greer, invited me to join the corporation as the CTO, the Chief Technical Officer.
Right.
Dealing with Ed about a year and a half ago, actually, and I'm on the board of directors of the corporation.
Now, you're with the, are you still with the University of New Hampshire?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay.
I'm on leave for a year. I've just taken leave of absence for the year, which is something that faculty members often do to work in different areas. And I decided that this work is so important because of the implications are profound and deep and have the potential of changing our world in a positive way. And that, given the opportunity, it was foolish for me to turn it down.
Now, I understand that you have a PhD, which is in?
It's in oceanography, actually.
Oceanography, okay.
And by the way, that institute is the study of Earth, oceans, and space.
Earth, oceans, and space.
Yes, I got to get my little ocean part in there because I've been a faculty member at the university for over 30 years, 32 years or so, and done research. I have graduate students. I teach courses, etc.
Right. Okay. Now, what attracted you with that kind of tenure and a focus on ocean studies? What attracted you to Dr. Greer and to Space Energy Access Systems?
Well, it goes back about 6 years ago when I learned from a relative of mine that the whole UFO phenomena was real, and because he had been in the White House working under President Eisenhower, and knew Eisenhower personally. His boss was the man that briefed Eisenhower on the whole UFO thing back in 1958 through 61 or 60. And so I learned from this relative of just about 6 years ago about the reality of all this. In fact, the skunk never told me about it until then. And, but he had been working with Dr. Greer on disclosing some of this information with the Senate and the House and what have you. And I then attended a closed briefing, a congressional briefing in the spring of '97, representing the governor of New Hampshire, Governor Shaheen, as her representative to this closed congressional briefing on the subject of UFOs and disclosure of the subject. People like Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, were there. and a number of other commanders in the Navy, captains in the Air Force, et cetera, who were speaking about the reality of this. Well, I realized very quickly that this is probably one of the most important things that, relative to this future of this planet. And once this knowledge is out, the vision of ourselves on the planet and everything else would change dramatically. In a sense, for the good. Now, the second thing that I realized, and this is where SEAS comes in, and Dr. Greer realized this too, as we interviewed more and more witnesses and put together the Disclosure Project, which was a massive press conference at the National Press Club several years ago.
Yeah, I got to watch that.
Yes, in 2001. We all realized that what the multiple witnesses were telling us is that, one, that the extraterrestrial craft were not using Exxon jet fuel to get here.
Right.
And that they were using technologies that were basically fundamentally based upon zero-point energy or vacuum state energy or whatever you wish to use the term. And if this indeed, so the first question one should ask if they hear that, extraterrestrial craft are here is that how are they getting here?
Right.
And they're getting here using some and then the question is, why aren't we using technologies? Why are we still running around using fossil fuels? So we decided that that since we knew the existence of these technologies, that we would form a corporation to find these technologies. We had multiple witnesses, literally hundreds of witnesses who talked about these things. And that we would try to get some of these technologies and bring it out because we could see I'm an oceanographer and I look at the environment and global warming and all the rest of it. So I've been studying that and teaching it for decades. And so I realized that we're never going to get away from that, continuing to burn fossil fuels, Kyoto Accords notwithstanding.
Yeah.
And that it was about time to look for some other technologies.
Let me come back to the statement you made about the relative that talked to you about 6 years ago. What was your reaction when he told you that this is real?
Well, I had done my homework prior to that, just because I'd always had a standing interest in the subject, and it took me 10 minutes to understand what he was telling me was true. He had no reason to lie to me. At the time, he was a colonel in the Army Reserves. He ultimately became a brigadier general in the Army Reserves before he retired. So he was a major line officer in the Army Reserves, and so it took me about 20 minutes to realize that the subject was real, and then my mind went racing. What are the implications of this?
Oh, certainly.
Particularly in the technology world. What are the implications of it? And that's where my focus has been for many years. I subsequently started working with Dr. Greer at that point.
Right. Look, it's one thing to obviously say that there are cultures or civilizations or however we want to describe them,
sure,
that have learned how to use this technology, perhaps for untold millennium. That's one thing to acknowledge that fact that it's a possibility. It's another to say that we as a race, with our penchant for fossil fuels and primitive nuclear fission technologies and things, that that we figured out how to do it. So I gather your job there at SEAS is to try to, if you will, ferret out what really are these legitimate out-of-the-box technologies and what I would regard probably as people who would like to pull an elaborate hoax on you. Is that true?
Sure. Well, no, not the elaborate hoax business, although that's certainly out there as well. A couple of comments. One is that one thing we learned from multiple witnesses is that in covert projects, we've had these technologies for probably 50 years. Second of all, in covert projects, we've also had anti-gravity craft, space-capable anti-gravity craft, homemade UFOs, if you want to call them that, sometimes known as ARVs or alien reproduction vehicles. We've had these working since the 60s, probably late 50s or early 60s, partly based upon our own scientist, Townsend Brown, who developed discovered the Byfield Brown effect, which is, we can go into that later if you wish, but the point is we've had some of these technologies for a long time in covert groups, covert programs, and for maybe 50 years. You got to realize that back as early as Tesla's work, Nikolai Tesla in the early 1900s, that he had discovered many of these technologies himself. And he's the inventor of AC current.
Right.
his legacy has been tremendous for the world, but he also worked on a lot of other things. And T. Henry Moray and a whole bunch of other scientists from the 20s and 30s had discovered the techniques to obtain and get at this zero-point energy through a number of different means. So this is not something new that's on the block. These things, these technologies have been subsequently suppressed by those who want to keep us on the fossil fuel regime.
Well, you'll pardon me if some of my listeners, are a bit skeptical about that.
Sure.
If we have this technology to create anti-gravitational devices and things like that, then why in God's name are we still running around on rubber tires and burning petroleum?
That's a good question. That's an extremely good question. It has to do fundamentally with control and money and power. You have to realize that the energy regime of the planet is controlled by a relatively small group of major corporations, and in cahoots, if you will, or in conjunction with the car manufacturers and other energy-producing corporations. So to change the direction of that means that they may not be in business. It's the old, the blacksmith putting horseshoes on horses. There aren't too many of them left.
Right.
Because technology has evolved and changed, and the same goes with this. So it has to do with power and the present power structure of the planet. Let's step back for a moment and say that, okay, we have a device the size of a bread box or sitting on a table that would produce several 5-10 kilowatts of energy without putting any oil or gas or anything into it. And these can be made for a couple $1,000 or in mass way somewhat less than that. Now, at that point, and there's a license to the Chinese, the Indians, and everybody else. At that point, suddenly, third world countries start to have access to energy capabilities that they do not have right now, nor will they ever have under the present fossil fuel regime of the planet. There's not enough oil and gas on the planet, nor tanker capability to carry enough oil and gas, say, to China, to provide the level of consumption that we use in the United States.
Yeah, speaking of which...
This can't happen.
Yeah, speaking of which...
So this is part of the control issue. If this is out of the bag, if you will, then third world countries, and I'll be sort of somewhat politically incorrect here, but let's include, say, China and India and a large part of Africa and Indonesia, which are major population centers on the planet.
Right.
We're essentially second to third world, depending on how you define them, at least the vast populations. Now, if these populations start to have energy, they're going to want a higher degree of control at the political infrastructure of the planet. This is going to change the political dynamic of the geopolitical dynamic of the planet. And the people who are in charge, let's call them the Europeans, Americans, that sort of band, Russians, Japanese, who are presently more or less in charge of the economic aspects of the planet, G7 if you wish, that dynamic will change. For the good, I might add, because right now 15% of the planet or 10% of the planet appear to be controlling 90% of the economic wealth of the planet.
Right.
Don't quote me on those numbers, but that's the sense of that.
Right.
Everybody sees that. It's not a mystery.
Okay. Let's talk about this concept of free energy, because every person that I, mentioned this to, people ask, well, who are you going to interview? And I say, well, I'm going to interview, gentleman on the subject of free energy, and immediately the reaction is, oh, you don't believe that. I mean, that violates all the laws of thermodynamics. So,
Well, in fact, it actually doesn't, but I mean, that's the myth that has been passed around. You have to understand that Maxwell, back in the 1800s, Maxwell's equations would describe electricity flow and magnetism, what have you. Maxwell's equations, the original ones, included terms that included this excess energy terms. These were, quote, regauged or modified by a gentleman by the name of Lorentz back in about 1903. The equations were made simpler, and literally the terms which included these free energy aspects were discarded from Maxwell's equations. So a subset now of Maxwell's equations, which have been used by effectively 4 generations of electrical engineers, do not include these terms. So it's no wonder, and in our physics books as well. So it's no wonder that the general population and the general scientific population has no understanding or concept, because they've never seen these equations. But if they did their homework, went back and looked at the original equations, they'd say, oh my God, here are terms that included energy many orders of magnitude more than what we normally typically get out of an energy-producing system.
Yeah, I know. I was reading something on one of the papers that you had on your website. There was a rather lengthy article by, was it Tom Bearden?
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden.
Yeah, and he was...
Or Dr. Tom Bearden. He's a PhD, Doctor of Science as well.
Right, yeah.
And he is an absolute genius in this field and has been a spokesman and a theoretician for putting the theory of this whole thing together. He's written a major book, I don't know if you saw that, called Energy from the Vacuum.
No.
In fact, I'm holding it in my hand right now. It's, golly, well over 900 pages discussing examples of these free energy devices and the theory behind them. He's got a website in which anybody can download humongous amounts of information about these technologies. He's a leading spokesman for these technologies.
Have you found, in your research and in your efforts here, have you actually found any, apart from, the speculated, UFO technology, have we actually found any legitimate free energy technology?
Certainly we have, and in fact I've seen things just in the recent weeks or so. Back in January, late January, SEAS announced that we had seen a device and that we were going to be working on it. Sitting on the sidewalk size of a bread box, about 8 pounds or so, putting out 500 watts of energy, running electric lights, motors, transistor radios, et cetera, with nothing more than a few watts into it, putting out 400 to 500 watts in AC power driving these things.
Yeah. How does one gauge whether or not? I mean, is there some way you can set this on a test bench rather than on the sidewalk and actually measure this?
Sidewalk's probably better than a test bench because it's just sitting out in the open.
Yeah. Right.
So hard to argue with, hidden wires and things. I've just recently seen a device that doesn't put that power out yet. But this is a set of Now, that particular device we saw was, quote, a rotary device, i.e. magnets and other things rotating. A device that we saw, that I've seen recently, for example, is a totally solid-state device, no moving parts, extracting energy from the ether wind that exists in the vacuum.
Now, how does that actually work? I guess I'm a little dense here, so I mean, how do you have a device sitting, with some type of electronic circuitry in it that is tapping this mysterious source? I guess I should probably paraphrase that by saying we create electricity from a mysterious source anyway.
That's right. And frankly, it is my sense of things that people really don't quite understand. They can make it work engineering-wise, but the theory about where it comes from is really pretty much of a mystery on how it is. So it's like most people know how to drive their car around and do simple things with their car, and yet I think most people would be pretty much mystified about exactly how it works and could certainly never build one. That's come. So how does that work? Well, I'm not really at liberty to explain how it works specifically, other than the fact that it uses magnets and other techniques to activate the vacuum state of this energy field and then extract energy from it.
Okay. Now,
the energy within this field is humongous if you just know how to get it. And it turns out that there are very complex ways of doing it. There are very simple ways of doing it. Devices I've seen have been very simple, actually, which is mind-boggling. And we've been told by people in covert projects that the true devices are very simple. They're just elegant.
Yeah. And I guess I come back to these covert projects. I mean, a guy raised on, like myself, science fiction and watching the X-Files, I tend to associate this kind of thing with that's just pure fiction. It's just ideas that, creative minds have come up with. I mean, do these things really exist?
Some of it is pure fiction, certainly, but there is a residual, if you will, residuum of activity that has been going on for mostly the last century, at least, to literally suppress this stuff. If you go back and look at the history of Tesla, and if you look at the history, who was bought out or suppressed by J.P. Morgan, to keep the power flowing.
Yeah.
There's a whole history. T. Henry Moray had his laboratory broken up by people who didn't want his devices to come out. I just talked to a very well-known inventor in this area who has a number of patents in this area. Just recently, who said about 7 or 8 years ago, a bunch of goons came in and beat him up in his lab up, threatening him if he brought any of this technology out that he would be it would be worse, go worse with him. So there's been a long history of this, and it's not just me saying this. I have personally talked to a number of inventors who've had this happen. So there we are.
Yeah.
So it's not you can call it a conspiracy theory, you can call it anything you want. The reality of it has happened.
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah. Let's talk about the briefing that you helped put together in 2000 for what was it, Senator? Was it Bob Smith? I think.
Yes, Senator Bob Smith. I'd met him at a large regional hearing on the Environmental Public Works Committee for the Senate, of which he was chairman at the time. This is in 2000. I believe it was 2000.
Yeah, I think that's the date.
Yes, it was October 2000. I think I met him in April of 2000. And I suggested to him that there was the problem was this committee was talking about water pollution due to gasoline. It was talking about air pollution due to gasoline burning and MTBE and other additives to gasoline and also other aspects. And I went to him and I said, Senator Smith, there are a number of technologies that will replace these technologies, but they aren't even being looked at. They aren't even on the radar screen. And he said, could you put together a briefing for me? And I said, I could do that. I said, I'm not the expert in this. However, I know a number of experts, and I'm pretty well versed in it myself. So he said, would you put together a briefing? And so we did. And I pulled in a number of experts from around the country. Dr. Bearden was one of those, Dr. Stephen Greer. Tom Vallone, who used to be at the Patent Office, talked about the suppression of patents on these topics. Dr. Paul LaViolette, who's written a number of books on scalar weapons and anti-gravity and was in the Patent Office as well, was there. Dr. Scott Chubb, who's with the Naval Research Laboratory,
yeah, I've spoken
about
to
the
Scott.
whole cold fusion stuff.
Right.
That aspect, Dr. Gene Maloff, who runs the Internet Energy Magazine, editor, used to be at MIT,
right,
has written extensively on cold fusion, was also there. And then I spoke, and I think that may be all.
Yeah. Now, this was presented to whom? Was it just the senator's staff, or?
This was presented to. It was a briefing for the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. In reality, the way that the government works is that the aides go to these briefings. And I had actually, to tell you the truth, I'd hoped Senator Smith would be there, but that was the day the Norfolk came into Virginia after being blown up. I think it was the Norfolk over in Middle East.
Oh, yes, I know which one, the Cole.
The Cole
yes,
came
right.
into Norfolk. Sorry, the Cole came into Norfolk.
Right.
So without calling things too directly here, he and his cronies went down to greet the ship instead of coming to a briefing which dealt with probably a far more important in the long run set of issues. But I can't address what senators do.
Right. So what was the reaction of the staffer? Did they give you kind of any feedback after hearing this?
There was the staffer. It was very positive, and the plan at that time was that, in fact, a letter from Senator Smith was that he wanted to go ahead and assign the National Academy of Sciences to do a study on these technologies, and more hearings, and then there would be a full-fledged Senate hearing on this. And somewhere along the line, that was during the winter of 2000, 2001. Somewhere along the line, somebody put their thumb or finger or hand down on it, and the whole thing went away. They wouldn't do anything, and I was told by somebody in the inside. He says, "Well, the next thing is the hydrogen economy, so you shouldn't be worrying about that."
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And so that's the mindset. So we gave the Senate an opportunity to get acknowledged some of these technologies and learn about, which included, by the way, anti-gravity technologies, zero-point energy technologies, and some other various alternate technologies.
Do you think part of that was, I guess we could speculate and say it was, part of a conspiracy, or was it just simply the people that are if you will, not certain about whether this technology is for real and are somewhat reluctant to be any way even remotely associated with it.
I think it's probably a little bit. I don't know about the conspiracy. I just leave that out. So
Sure.
right now, I have no clue. I have no idea what happened behind the scenes.
Right.
But somebody made the decision, whether it's high or low, to not pursue this. And maybe, who knows? It may be folks walking into the senator's office or some of the staff members' office that you want some more money in your campaign, you need to just drop this. I mean, this is the way things are done. Yeah. I mean, that's no mystery to anybody.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I was majorly disappointed because the staffer we were working with, very bright guy, was fully interested and was very excited about moving ahead on this. And he just got stepped on.
Yeah. Is there any have you looked at the possibility of doing like hosting conferences and things and having these technologies
there are conferences held all the time around the world about these things. Let's take cold fusion for an example. Dr. Scott Chubb at the Naval Research Laboratory is presently putting on with others a large international conference on cold fusion. Literally hundreds of scientific papers from major labs, both government and private labs around the world, who have demonstrated the reality of this. However, a major part of the public and a major part of the scientific community still thinks it is hogwash, in spite of the evidence of literally hundreds of scientifically and peer-reviewed papers to the contrary. So putting on a scientific conference and whatever does almost nothing.
Yeah.
Because the knowledge is out there if people look for it.
Yeah. I'm wondering, because of CSETI's close association with Dr. Greer, obviously the CEO,
yes,
and his involvement with this whole UFO phenomenon, which culturally, I think most Americans, are somewhat curious about. Some fraction in polls say that people have actually seen them. But still, there's this.
And believe, and well over 50% believe that there's something going on there.
Yeah. But at the same time, every time this subject is brought up, it's always tongue-in-cheek. It's never with any kind of a serious, sense of that this really exists. People kind of look at you and say, what's wrong with you? Does that association then does that end up helping or hindering your efforts at CSETI to try to?
Well, it depends on who the party is. It's a bit of both, and if it is the naive press. Who don't do their homework on this subject, I might add, because I've dealt with the press a number of times on the UFO issue, and who don't do their homework, their standard reaction programmed for about 50 years, since the late 40s, the combination deliberately and now it's just ingrained, is to react with a slight giggle and laugh about little green men.
Right. And I think we do that.
But however, the energy, so the majority of the people are sort of dilettantes in the UFO field. And they're interested, always in that interesting, what's on television tonight, or let's go out to a ball game, or what's Jay Leno going to say, whatever. However, and they can't really get their head around the implications because it's too big for them to think about.
Yeah.
However, everybody has an energy bill. California was whacked by Enron and that whole energy fiasco several years ago. So everybody in the country has an energy bill and can identify with high prices, and I think the vast majority of the country people get it, that we are on a precarious, slippery slope relative to cheap, accessible energy over the next decade or so.
Let's talk about some practical applications of this. Let's assume for the moment that free energy from the vacuum, space energy, whatever you want to call it, quantum energy, that in fact actually does exist.
Well, it's been reported and discussed in a number of scientific papers, peer-reviewed. So, it does exist.
Okay. So how do we take that energy then and apply it in a practical term? And obviously, my interest here is in solving some of these transportation problems, because so much of the pollution that we create in this world comes from the vehicles that we use to motor ourselves around in. So how might we apply this, for example, to run a car?
Okay, that's a very good question. Let me step back for one moment about the car issue. One is, in the United States, there's about 200 million cars.
Yep.
Plus or minus something. I wrote about this in my Senate briefing. We make about 20 million a year. So it would take about 10 years to replace all the cars at our present production level. Second point is that Detroit, it takes a number of years or several years. They're already working on models into the 2004-5 range, at least. So that it will take Detroit or major car manufacturers. I'm using Detroit as just the focus of this. That it takes several years for them to retool, regauge, and re-engineer something that might include some sort of alternate energy device. Where they're playing with it, flirting with it in sort of electrical or combination hybrid cars right now. But so electrical driving of these, there's two ways to do this. One is to produce a free energy motor that just puts out torque, it's a rotary type device that would just continually turn, essentially powering itself.
Okay.
These things exist. So you could do that. Well, that means you have basically replaced the engine with that device. But one of the problems with that, unless you have an extremely high horsepower version of this, because our cars use hundreds of horsepower in some cases.
Right.
They don't need that to run, but they do it because people want torque, and a big number makes them feel good. However, battery technology and electric motor technology can allow the spurts of high energy necessary to accelerate, but certainly not use it when you're sort of cruising down the highway. So let you envision this an example of a technology. I have a device, for example, and these things all exist, by the way. I have a device that can recharge batteries with just a very small amount of input. It re-gauges the batteries so that they continue to be fully charged. And then I have a second zero-point energy device, perhaps a solid-state one, that is providing the electricity to provide this small amount of pulsing charge to keep the batteries fully charged. We then have a car that would, using two versions of zero-point energy technology, to keep a large bank of batteries fully charged, and so to provide the acceleration for the car necessary in the driving power of it. That car, which is in a prototype, could be built within a year. Don't hold me to that.
Right.
But in that sort of scale, 1 to 2 years, it could just go across the United States, just go on and on and on. The only thing you'd have to do is at some point the batteries would crap out because battery technology is still evolving.
Yes, right.
So that you might have to replace the batteries. But we are working with corporations that have battery technology that is far superior to the standard lead-acid batteries, and is starting to come down price-wise to be more or less equivalent.
Yeah.
That can go through 1,000 or several thousand recharges, whereas a normal lead-acid battery is several hundred recharges.
Well, I'm wondering whether or not even maybe ultracapacitors might serve in this, where you can recharge the ultracapacitors.
We've actually talked about that as well. There are other ways to store electrical energy with large capacitors and what have you.
Yeah. Okay.
So that example of a technology may be very real. Now, in that case, you want something relatively lightweight because you've got some heavy batteries.
Right.
If you're running a household thing, and there's a size issue there. So if you're running a household, a device the size of a small chest, for example, might very easily provide enough power to run a household, which is on the order, you only need a kilowatt or two on average to run a household, on average, even though demand for a household with the microwave and the air conditioning and a few other things may be 4 to 8 kilowatts or 4 to 8,000 watts.
Right.
In the demand mode. So you have to have that capability, even though the long-term average is lower.
How do you get this technology? I mean, I assume that this is part of the reason that CES was formed, was to find a way to get this technology to the marketplace. How do you do that? How do you keep one corporation or one government from monopolizing this, like oil has been monopolized, so that people end up having to, continue to pay through the nose for their energy? How do you do that?
Don't know exactly yet. If your listeners are interested, they might want to go to the CES Power, the website for CES, which is CESpower.com. I suppose you'll give it later on.
Oh yeah, we'll link to it, obviously.
Okay, so they might want to go there, and there we have a strategic overview listed that provides a view of how we plan to go about this. One of the problems that inventors have had over the past decades, if you will, is that they feel that, and we run into these inventors almost daily right now, they feel that because they're an inventor and really clever and smart and all the rest of it, and they are, in the inventing world, that they should be able to put together a business that will directly go up against a multi-trillion-dollar per year energy cartel that runs the planet.
Yeah.
And that is probably, it falls into the term of very naive thinking. So we have a strategic plan that includes not only the technology, but a strategic plan that will allow it to be patented and not suppressed through Section 181 of the patent law, which basically, if somebody at the patent office or whatever decides that this particular device has a, quote, threat to national security, which is a major buzzword these days,
Sure.
that the device can be stolen from the inventor, basically. The inventor gets no money for it and slap a Section 181 on it, which means the government steals the rights to that device from the inventor, and if the inventor ever speaks about it or whatever else, can be either fined multiple thousands of dollars or thrown into jail.
Wow.
It's a major disincentive.
That's a real disincentive.
It's a major disincentive, and one of the, I think, representatives from New Mexico about a year ago went through some of the patent office stuff and found there were 3,000 to 4,000 patents that fell into this general category of being confiscated by, quote, our government.
Wow.
So that is a major problem, but we have a way we believe we can work around that, and that's part of our strategy.
Okay.
To basically, instead of working in the dark, which is the way most inventors work, or by themselves or alone, to do it in the 10 billion candle power spotlight of the national media.
Yeah.
So once we have a device that we've had confirmed by major laboratories and ourselves, of course, first, we'll be announcing this on major news, and we've been told by the head of some major news networks that they would love to see this come out because they know this stuff has been suppressed. And once this stuff is announced, then it's a little hard for, quote, somebody to suppress it. And the news media tells us they would just love to do a story on here are some energy devices that inventors have found that will get us off the oil pipeline,
yeah,
if you will, in the long run. This isn't going to happen overnight. And this is being suppressed for reasons that only Cheney and Rumsfeld could tell us.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, how close are you?
So you get the general picture there. And so we plan to go up again and use that against it, because the groups that want to keep this stuff silent really work in the dark or really work in the quiet behind the scenes.
How close are you to holding a conference like that? You know, you held the disclosure. Yeah, you hold the Disclosure Project press conference. How close are you to having this conference?
In January we announced one device on George Norrie Coast to Coast, which has a listenership of 10 million or more. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's in that range. And we announced it a number of other places. That lit up our switchboard, if you will.
Yeah.
We had literally 50 to 100. I don't know the exact number because they go mostly into Dr. Greer, but dozens and dozens and dozens of people calling us up to say, when can we invest in you? What can you do? We had one chap offer us $1 billion, literally, for this technology. And so there are people out there. Let me explain one thing. There are a lot of what we might call white hats, or people, good people, very good people within the government and within business who know this technology is real. They cannot get their hands on it. And they're looking to us because they see the environment going to hell in a handbasket, depending on how you want to define all that. And they see the global energy crisis being approached. Dr. Bearden, in his briefing to the Senate committee, suggested if we aren't at a point where this technology is starting to be developed by the end of 2003, that it's going to be too late to integrate these technologies into our society to make a difference in terms of our energy consumption.
Yeah.
And there's a number of arguments within the government and other places, but there are some very strong data suggesting that by the end of the decade, or 12-12, or 12-11, 12-12, somewhere in that period, that the oil gas production rates on the planet will be starting downward. In other words, the curve has peaked.
Right, yeah.
So population is going up, energy demand is going up, production rates are going down.
Yeah.
You can see the problem.
Yeah.
And what happens at that point is that countries who have oil and countries who don't and need it will start raising the ante.
Yeah. Well, we've already seen that happen.
We've already had two wars over oil. I don't think anybody doesn't realize that. And the potential for the Middle East to blow up is exceedingly ripe.
Yeah. If the existence of UFOs becomes a proven, and I'm not sure how we go about actually doing that, short of having, these devices, fly over, the World Series or something.
Yep. Well, this is one of the reasons, if I may interrupt for a moment.
Sure.
This is one of the major reasons why the UFO issue has been kept secret, because of the energy issue.
So that's what I'm going to ask you, is that this is going, if this technology exists then, this could have an enormously disruptive impact on society. I mean, how do we deal with this?
Well, that's a very good question, and one I've been asked many times, and one in which I've actually had discussion with inventors who say, the time isn't right, we just shouldn't bring this out. Let me step back for a minute and look at the alternatives. The alternatives are we continue on our present path, and as the Chinese say, if you continue on the same path, you may end up where you're going.
Yeah.
Or just a paraphrasing.
Sure.
But our present path is toward global war over energy.
Yeah.
Within probably the decade. Now that's not very appealing either. This little Mideast war in Iraq is costing us God knows how many billions of dollars.
About $1 billion a week.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. It was a little war. It took a bit of time. Few people got killed, and which is insane because of the reason why it was all done. That's another issue. But that's the alternative. So we can either start to bring this technology out now being the next, say, year or so, make people aware of it, and we start transitioning in a responsible manner to this new technology. Or we can wait for another decade and then have multiple wars, very high energy prices, and have a crash program to bring this out, which really will disrupt things. Now, the second thing that I think you mentioned, or other people mentioned anyway, is the world ready for this? Maybe you want to ask that question.
Yeah, well, that was my last question for you.
Okay.
Are we really ready for this?
Well, there we go. We're working well here. That's a very good question as well. And I think what you have to realize is that people on the planet, you have to look at what we already have on this planet. We have multiple nuclear and hydrogen bomb weapons of mass destruction, biological warfare, et cetera, et cetera. We also already have the means to destroy the planet again and again and again and again. So we also have major weapons of mass destruction and other types of weapons that you've never heard about. The Star Wars technology, for example, which we have heard about, the HARP technology.
Right.
Is another example that could be used as a weapon, and may be, for all we know. So we already have some major weapons of mass destruction and what have you else. And we also, and secondarily, we have a planet of third world, second world, and first world haves and have-nots. The stresses which cause wars on the planet deal with people having and people not having. If there's despair among the population, and the people see no future because there's no potential for energy in their lives at all, then going to war and committing suicide, bombing, etc., it seems to be the only viable alternative to these people. What if we had a technology that had promised to bring them energy and bring their lifestyle up a bit? Then, at that point, there's suddenly some alternatives. We look at our population of even children in the United States, and there's a lot of despair among kids. They see the trend. They get it. Global warming, increased energy stuff, major water pollution, major air pollution, major ground pollution, et cetera, due to the way that we're doing things on this planet. So, if we offer an alternative, something that comes out of left field, if you will, and say, hey, here is some potential for some energy developing technologies, which then can be used to clean up the environment, clean up our sewage thing, because all these things are energy intensive, provide transportation that's non-polluting, etc. Suddenly you say, my God, there is a future for the planet. And I think that is the major message on this thing. So whether the people on the planet are ready for it, were they ready for airplanes, automobiles? Look at what's happened in the last century.
Oh, yeah, many changes.
Yeah, tremendous changes. You know, everybody says, you know, from the Wright brothers to on the moon, et cetera. That occurred in 70 years or so.
Yeah. Let me ask you one final question.
Yes, sir.
And then we'll wrap it up here.
Okay.
When will, just give me a ballpark, your best crystal ball on here, when will we see a free energy device actually on the market?
This is definitely the crystal ball department, isn't it?
That's all I can ask.
Good question, and I wish my crystal ball was as clear as maybe yours is. I would expect 1 to 2 years, and but that depends on a lot of factors. One, we have to identify the device that is commercially viable. At that point, there will be major research and development going from the potentially commercial viable to something that is underwriter laboratory approved, you know, and tested left, right, and center, et cetera.
Right.
And so that takes a while. And then building, of course, manufacturing capability, facilities to do that. This can be done relatively rapid on a fast-track basis, and we plan to do that because once the knowledge of this thing is out, there's going to be incredible demand. I mean, who wouldn't want something that replaces their $100 electric bill a month in their house?
Oh, I'm ready for it right now.
$150.
Yeah.
Even if it costs you, you know, $3,000 or $4,000 to do that, with a combination of tax credits and putting it on your mortgage means that it's a null game.
Yeah.
So this is how that might be done. But it's going to take probably a couple years to that point. However, I would expect that there's more and more interest in the potential of these technologies. I mean, your program is just one example of
Sure.
that. And there's a lot of people within the present government and places of power, if we'll put it that way, who know the existence of these technologies and are just waiting for something to come forth. And we have people contacting us almost every day from those sort of levels of places, saying, when are you going to come out? What's going on? How can we help you?
Yeah, great. Well,
I think once we come forth with something that we're comfortable with, which I expect to happen within the next few months or so, based upon what we're doing right now, that I think the floodgates may open rather rapidly.
Excellent.
Which is exciting because it's not as, to quote Tom Bearden, two things. He said that, you know, if we aren't cranking these things out by the first quarter of 2004, we might as well go home and go fishing. Is a quote he told me when we had lunch together after that briefing.
It's all over.
Yeah, because it's an example is similar to the airplane going down the runway. There's a point on that runway where the airplane either takes off or crashes, and we're approaching that point.
Yeah.
With this whole issue.
Yeah.
So time is of essence in this project.
I'd like to thank Dr. Ted Loder, who's been with us today from Space Energy Access Systems, talking about their innovative work and promising work in looking at the possibility and reality of free energy devices, free energy technology as a way to help solve many of the world's pressing problems. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Bill. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye.